Now we're going to look at what I'm referring to as hauntings, homes, and properties, okay? So this has more to do with demonic activity that involves places versus people. Now you need to understand something about demonic activity. All demonic activity originates with people. This notion that, oh, somebody opened up a portal and now this portal exists at this location. That's a crock of mayonnaise, okay? That is foolishness. There is no such thing as opening a door between the spirit world and the human world, you know, the flesh world, at a particular location. And that is, you know, now this portal exists, this doorway exists there. No, all spiritual activity originates with people. A person has to open a door. All right, we've talked about it. Now you're going to notice what we're talking about this week and next or so, a lot of overlap, because it's the same identical principles, just applied slightly differently. People open the doors through witchcraft, through the occult, through paganism and various other means, through articles of divination and these sorts of things. Oftentimes when you're talking about indigenous peoples, you begin to get into religions that involve, depending on where you're at and depending on the specific groups of people, some of their forms of worship actually involve entertaining demons. And so, you know, a lot of your African religions, for instance, if you notice, a lot of times there's often hauntings, as it were, relative to places associated with slavery. And our good secular friends tell us, well, that's because slavery was such a blight. Well, first of all, I got news for you. And I know people get mad when the preacher says this. Slavery was a part of life for humanity for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. While it was going on, nobody thought anything of it. It was not generally viewed as this hideous, terrible, horrible thing, even though looking back, we see it as such. But at the time, it was just viewed as a way of life. It was what it was, if you follow what I'm saying. All right? And so this notion, you know, oh, slavery was so wicked and horrible and terrible, and that's why these ghosts are still around. Well, that would almost make sense if at the time it were viewed that way and it were seen that way and it were perceived that way, but it wasn't. But in reality, what oftentimes happens is many of these slaves came to the United States from African countries and they brought their religious practice with them. I know a man in New York City, he used to be a friend of mine. I can't say we were very close friends, we weren't, but we were pretty knowledgeable of one another. And he was involved in a African religion. And one of their practices was they used to have to go out in the woods and they would have like a big circle drawn out in the woods, and they had to sit in that circle, didn't have a tent, didn't have nothing, just had to sit in that circle for so many days until they received their spirit guide. Now these people believe that they believe in, quote, good demons, bad demons. Okay? That notion, of course, we understand as God's people from a biblical perspective, there is no such thing as good demons, bad demons.
Right.
However, they believe that way, which is how the enemy takes advantage, because he can make you think some of his guys aren't so bad and some of them are bad, you know. But that's how they believe. Well, they would go out in that circle and they believed they were receiving a good demon. but they still understood it to be a demon. Okay? So, that's an African religion. Imagine what many of these people were coming to the United States with. Imagine the religious practices and the beliefs they were coming to the United States with. Now you can understand perhaps how come there is so much demonic activity related to locations where slavery was prevalent. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Sure.
Okay, so it doesn't have anything to do with how horrific slavery was. No, it has to do with the fact that oftentimes the slaves were bringing in their African-y religions, which in many instances involve literal demon worship, literal. And so anyhow, so all demonic activity originates with people. You'll notice that the television experts, as they like to bill themselves, will often try to go back in the history of the property. And they look at situations and circumstances to try to justify the spiritual presence. Okay, when you understand that spiritual activity originates with people, not with places, then you understand that what you really need to be looking at if you want to understand the origins is the people. And how those people may have opened doors. I watch these shows all the time, and over and over and over again, I see a clear explanation to me as to the origin of the demonic activity. Sometimes, they say, well, there was this religious leader and he ran this crazy, basically what amounted to a little cult. Okay? And they had all kinds of abuses going on, and they had all kinds of things going on. Well, there again, you've got a spirit, because you've got a man who may have sold himself out to demonic activity as a so-called spiritual leader, and he didn't want to be a leader, he wanted to be a god to these people. And the minute you start getting that kind of foolishness going in your spirit, you open the door to all kinds of spirits. And then you notice how, just like with Jim Jones and many of these others, how they become excessively authoritarian, and they beat people and they abuse people and these sorts of things, okay? Because they don't want their authority questioned, and they want what they say to be like God speaking. It's absolute. What I say goes, and bless God, you're not going to question it. So, I see oftentimes, I'm seeing the people, and I'm seeing where the probable door was open to the demonic activity. Doesn't have anything to do with the activity that you see in the flesh follows the demonic entry, not vice versa. So this religious leader, it's not an issue of he was mean and rotten and blah, blah, and he died, and then all of a sudden, he came back and all this stuff is going, no. That religious leader was doing all this thing by reason of his actions and his beliefs and his conducts. He opened doors to spirits. When he died, the spirits that he once hosted, the spirits that were once part of his life, what does the Bible say? When an unclean spirit has gone out of a man, he roameth through the dry places. Okay, now it's in effect disembodied. Okay? But the spirits started with this man. He is the portal. People are the portal. People are the way the spirits come in to a given situation or circumstance, okay? So when these people die, now you've got spirits that occupied this individual, but that individual's no longer living. I love my grandfather, my mother's dad. I loved him dearly. But my grandfather had a number of issues. I believe he had psychological issues, but I also am thoroughly convinced, I have no question in my mind, that he had demonic issues. I have no question that there were certain spirits that he gave license to in his life. He let them take control of certain areas of his life. And my grandfather had a number of areas in his life where things were just out of control. One of those areas was jealousy. My grandfather was my grandmother was huge. My grandmother was a very large woman. And my grandfather acted toward her like she was a size 2 in a bikini. And I mean, and my grandmother never gave any indication in the world. I never saw any indication in the universe that she was unfaithful in any way, shape, size, or form. But my grandfather had a spirit of jealousy. And that thing literally had him tormenting her to death just about every day of her life. Okay? He also had a spirit of anger. He did not respond biblically, Christianly, to some incidents and circumstances in his life that caused him to become very angry. He wound up opening the door. He coddled that anger. He allowed that anger to fester. And my grandfather, I mean, he could barely sneeze without being so angry that, I mean, constantly. He was constantly running around, cussing like a lunatic. And I mean, you wouldn't believe the little things that would set him off. He had a terrible, horrible temper. Well, when my grandfather died, I said to my grandmother on the day of his funeral, I said, I'm going to go through this house and I'm going to do an expulsion. And my grandmother looked at me, and my grandmother loved to second guess me on things like this. Oh, CJ, why would you do that? I said, Grandma, trust me, you'll be thankful I did. I said, Grandpa had demons. That man had some spirits. Those spirits no longer have Grandpa. That means that if we don't get rid of them now, they're going to show themselves. I said before, I would not for 1 minute, based on my grandfather's conduct and the way he behaved and the way he conducted himself, it wouldn't have surprised me one bit if my grandmother told me, a couple months later, man, we've got pictures flying off the walls and, that anger demonstrating itself and all, you know what I'm saying? And so I said, no, we need to get rid of those spirits. We couldn't get rid of them out of him, but now they're not in him any longer. And that means that there's a good possibility they'll linger around here. So we need to get rid of them. And I went through the house, and my Aunt Leslie, one of my mother's sisters, she said, Amen, CJ, I'm with you. She knew I was right. She said, I'm with you. She said, I think you're 100% right. She said, if we don't do that, you watch and see if stuff don't start. She said, the way my father acted, the way he conducted himself, said I wouldn't be at all surprised if demons didn't start manifesting themselves now that he's gone. So my Aunt Leslie and I went through the entire house and we did an expulsion. Not one day's trouble. See, if you know how these things work in the spirit realm, you can approach them proactively, okay? And you can prevent trouble. This is one reason why I strongly recommend to people, if you buy a new home or you're going to move into a new property, you don't know what the people who lived there before you were involved with. Mm-hmm. You don't know what kind of spiritual activity they were engaged in. You don't know what kind of spirits they may have entertained or what kind of spirits they may have invited into their lives. And you don't want to deal with that residual spiritual presence. Okay? So, the first thing you need to do when you buy a home or you buy or rent a property, go through that property, anoint the walls with oil, and invite the presence of the Lord into your home, and tell anything that is there that doesn't belong there that it is not welcome and it will not be tolerated. You take authority over it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it must go. And I've told you before, one of the acts that you do as you perform an expulsion, these things are symbolic. But in the symbolism, there is
connection.
Yeah, it really speaks for you to do these symbolic things, okay? You know, communion is symbolic. Baptism is symbolic. These are symbols, okay? But it helps to convey and impart important spiritual truths. Well, the same thing is true when you're dealing with demons, especially when you're trying to cleanse a property or a home or something that's supposed to be haunted. Open a door or open a window and command those spirits to leave in the name of Jesus Christ. By opening the door or opening the window, all you're doing is symbolically, you're saying, I want you out. Okay? It's just a symbolic act, but it's an important act.
Right.
Do that. Do that. Don't fail to do that, you know? And so when I do a property, that's one of the things that I do. I always open a door, open a window, and I command the spirits to leave. Well, anyway, so I did that at my grandparents' house, you know. And they never had a moment's trouble, but I guarantee you there would have been. I know as sure as I'm alive, I know there would have been. My aunt, one of my aunts, who I believe also has demonic issues, and if you knew her, you'd understand why. For one thing, she's got a religious spirit like you wouldn't believe. And she had a number of dreams involving my grandfather after he died. And in these dreams, my grandfather said things to her that do not mesh with Christian teaching. Okay? So, you know that didn't originate with God. So, you know, I understand sometimes the Lord allows us to have dreams. He's allowed me to have dreams that caused me comfort, you know, and caused me to be comforted and all that sort of thing. But when something is said or something is conveyed that is contrary to biblical, sound Christian teaching, then you know it does not originate with the Lord. And my aunt had some dreams. She and her husband came along and they bought the house from my grandmother. And that way, you know, she wouldn't have the house any longer to have to pay taxes and care for. You know, she lived out the remainder of her life there for the next 10 years. But Grandma didn't have all the care, you know, of the property. And then my aunt and her husband fixed it up and did all kinds of work on it and that sort of thing. All right, so anyway, when you're dealing with properties, you have to understand somebody somewhere along the line had to open the door. Excuse me. When you see my allergies, I'm getting a lot of drainage here. When you watch these programs on television and you see there's a long track record at a given property for deaths, untimely deaths, or tragic deaths, youthful deaths, you know, accidental deaths, that sort of thing, then there is a good probability that a spirit of death was brought in on the scene, on that property at some point by somebody. Okay? So when these experts go back, they go back and they'll say, oh, you know, there's been all these deaths, and Amy will tell you, oh, well, this spirit's been here a very long time, you know. This thing's been here a very, very long time. But what they never talk about is what brought them in to begin with. No, they always try to act like the origin of the spirit was the death of a person, because according to them, the spirit is a person who once lived there. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right. So according to their way of thinking, the origin is, well, when this person died, okay, now his ghost is doing thus and so. Well, from a biblical Christian perspective, we understand that the origin goes perhaps through that person, but it's not that person's spirit who's floating around doing things. No, it is the spirits that person invited into their life or allowed into their life that are now doing these things, okay? So somewhere along the line, you may have had, for instance, you've seen these programs where they talk about, there's one, for instance, there was a lady who killed a number of men. She actually kind of rented out rooms, more or less, and all of a sudden, without fail, these men that rented from her, she said, they took off, and there was no record of where they went or what they did. And they found out years later she had murdered tons of men, had them buried all over her property. She'd have these men come in staying in her property, and then she'd get hold of everything they owned and everything they had and all their money and blah, 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 but she was murdering. Well, there is such a thing as a spirit of murder. A lot of times people who are what we would call in our world today serial killers are under the influence of a spirit of murder. They're being driven to murder. They are literally being pushed. They're being driven by that spirit that has taken up entry in their life. Now again, you remember, we'll go back a few weeks in our talking about how demons work. All it takes is not responding and dealing with things at a Christian biblical level to begin with. Might have started out with they experienced something growing up, they became very angry, and they allowed their anger to fester. They allowed their anger to boil over, and ultimately they wound up opening the door to a spirit of anger. The spirit of anger then turned around and pushed that door open a little bit wider, so now came in a spirit of violence. Right? All of a sudden you got a kid who is angry all the time, but he's violent as well. All of a sudden he's fighting all the other kids, he's killing cats, he's doing all these things. Then, as time goes by, he winds up with a murderous spirit. Okay? And that spirit comes in and says, you're angry, take your anger out. Go ahead, take your anger out. Do that. And, you can get relief. You can feel a temporary sense of relief every time you kill somebody. And then they're just going down the chain, killing person after person after person. And it becomes sport to them. And they kind of get a temporary high off of it, And now again, you've got people in the psychology world who are going to tell you, that's just, because of what they grew up with, and that's just, well, there are a lot of people that grew up with stuff like that don't become serial killers.
That's right. That's right.
There's a lot of people who grew up in the same exact circumstance. Honey, I got news for you. I know, based on what a psychologist told me, a lot of people grew up in my circumstances would have become a serial killer, or would have become a rapist, or would have become something awful, So that's why responding to life circumstances from a biblical Christian perspective is essential. By doing that, you cut the enemy off at the pass. The door is never opened. That's why when we're troubled in spirit, we ask God for peace. See? Because He'll give it to you. God will give you peace when you have no reason in the world to have peace.
That's right.
When you should still be troubled, when you should still be flustered and upset, God will allow His Spirit to come over you and impart a peace to you that is just supernatural, just, absolutely miraculous. I remember some years ago, my nephew was going through some stuff, and he went and tried to kill himself. And I got a phone call saying, your nephew's in the hospital, he is on life support, and things don't look real good, you need to get up to the hospital. And that was in Tyler. Tommy and I got in the car, we're driving to Tyler, and of course I'm praying, and I'm praying, and I'm praying, and I'm praying, and I'm praying. And then all of a sudden, the Spirit of the Lord just spoke to my heart and said, it's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. All of a sudden, this peace came over my spirit. I didn't feel the need to keep praying about it. Listen, when God's given you the victory, you don't have to keep praying about it.
That's right.
When God's told you it's all good, then you quit praying. All right, literally, you stop. There's no longer any need to keep asking because God has spoken. And so the Lord put this peace. All of a sudden, I started singing this old chorus, and there is peace in the time of trouble. There is peace in the midst of the storm. There is peace though the world be raging in the shelter of His arm. And I started singing. I sung that all the way the rest of the trip to Tyler. I just sang about that peace that I was feeling and enjoyed the peace. I got to the hospital, Jack, I wasn't anxious, I wasn't concerned, I wasn't worried. I went in there knowing that God had spoken and everything was going to be okay before I even got there. And so it's imperative that we deal with things in faith, that we approach every circumstance and situation in our life with faith. That includes deeply tragic and horrific situations. This is where a lot of people fail the test. It can be anything from an accident involving a great deal of pain, like I talked about, a little while ago. This lady had an accident. She was in a lot of pain, and she allowed the enemy to cause her to invite a spirit of pain into her life, because she began to hold God at blame for this accident. Instead of looking to God to comfort her, and instead of looking to the Lord to deliver her, she just started blaming Him and faulting God for what had happened to her. And this is why, to be frank and honest, and I know some people are going to have a hard time with this, but I'm going to say it because it's the truth. If you're molested, if you're raped, if you're the victim of a violent crime, you need to make certain you respond to those circumstances with faith. Because those kind of circumstances are ideal opportunities for the enemy to gain an open door.
Yeah.
Okay? I've cast more demons out of people and had the Lord show me that they entered through childhood abuse. Literally, while I'm casting the demons out, the Lord has shown me. I had an uncle. As a matter of fact, this anecdote might actually help you, because it kind of borders on what we're talking about even now. I had an uncle in Pennsylvania who was living in Pennsylvania. He had remarried. It was his second wife, and she had a couple of girls from her first marriage. And my uncle's girls lived with their mother, so his kids didn't live with him. And my uncle was a truck driver, so he wasn't home a lot. Well, I and my former partner had moved into the same town as my uncle was living. And I didn't have any other family in that town. I didn't have anybody else there. So obviously, if I noticed my uncle was home, I would like to stop and visit with him and spend some time with him. So I used to try to do that. Well, about a year or so earlier, my grandmother and my grandfather and my uncle's two daughters, who live with their mother, and my partner and I, we had all gone down to Pennsylvania. We spent Thanksgiving with my uncle and his wife, and And during that visit, I discerned that this lady my uncle married had spirits. She had demonic issues. Well, on the way home back to Connecticut, Jason and I lived in New York City, but we had gone to Connecticut and rode with my grandparents down. On the way back to Connecticut, my grandmother said, "So, what do you think of your uncle's wife?" And I said, "Well, she's very nice." I said, "But she's got spirits, she's got demons." And my grandmother, "Oh, for crying out loud, oh, good grief, I want to tell you, it annoys me, but people who have no discernment, if you don't have discernment, you're not going to have a clue whether what I'm saying is right or wrong.
Exactly.
Because you don't have discernment. If you don't have discernment, I might as well be going because you don't know what I'm saying, okay? And I've had that happen. It happens all the time, and it's very frustrating because I can see these things just as plain as day. And yet everybody around me just blind as a bat. They don't see anything unless they see that woman going, you know, they don't see the demons. Well, I did. I saw them. And so about a year or so later, Jason and I moved down there. Part of it was she practically begged us to come down, told us she'd help us get a church off the ground if we'd come down to their community. And we were looking to get out of New York City. We didn't want to stay in New York City. And so, you know, we kind of jumped on the opportunity to get out of New York, went to Western Pennsylvania. Every time my uncle's car would be in the driveway, and he lived on a main drag. So if I went to the grocery store or the bank or almost anywhere, on my way back home, I'd go right past his house. Well, next to his house was a little parking lot, and that's where he parked his car. So if I saw his car there, that meant he was home. And he had a garage that faced the road, and a lot of times the garage would be open. He'd be in there working on his car or something. You know, he worked on cars as well. And so on at least probably 5 different occasions, Jack, I stopped there when my uncle was home. And I'd either knock on the door and, you know, hey, Phil, how you doing? And we'd start talking. And I mean, we'd no sooner start talking than here'd come his wife. Oh, Philip, we need to go. We've got somewhere to go. Remember, I promised so-and-so we'd do thus and such. And, or I told so-and-so we would do this. Or I said that, you know. Literally every single time. We'd barely be talking. Honestly, I don't think we'd get through 5 minutes. And this woman, without fail, came along and was kiboshing everything. And then Philip say, I'm sorry, Chuck, but I guess we're supposed, you know, I guess this, you know. And so finally one day, I went by and he happened to be in the garage working on his minivan. And I stopped and I went in the garage and I'm talking to him, you know, and we're talking. And all of a sudden, here comes his wife, just like clockwork. Phil, I told so-and-so we do that. And he said, okay. And he said, you know, he said, every stinking time you come over, every single time this happens, you know. He said, well, I'll tell you what, that shouldn't take more than a little while. He said, if you come back by in a little while, he said, and I'm here, then come on in and we'll visit. So we did what we were doing, and we were coming back by the house, and lo and behold, Philip was right there in the garage. So I stopped, went in the garage, started talking to him. He said, we didn't go. He said, all of a sudden it wasn't so important that we needed to go. He said, so we didn't go anywhere. He said, I've been here the whole time. He said, we could have visited, you know, and he was kind of aggravated. He and I grew up very close. We were only about 1.5 years apart in age. My mother's the oldest of 10 children, and he was the youngest of 10 children. So, you know, we grew up practically like brothers, literally, Philip and I. So anyway, so we're talking again. All of a sudden, here comes the wife. Now, we've got to do what we were talking about doing earlier. Have to do it. Absolutely have to do it. Philip looked at her, he said, woman, every stinking time my nephew comes by, he said, you do this to us. He said, well, today it's over. I'm not doing it. He said, whatever you need to do, you go do it. He said, we're going to visit today. He said, now go make a pot of coffee and hush up. Well, I'm telling you, she was aggravated. It was very visibly clear she was aggravated. So after a while, he finishes working on his car. He said, come on in the house, let's have some coffee. You know, we go in the house, we're sitting in the living room visiting, you know, and she's coming in. Well, Philip, you know, we really need to. He said, I told you. He said, I told you. He said, I told you. I don't care what you want to do today. I don't care if you promised the president you were going to wash his undies. We're not doing it. He said, I'm gonna visit. He said, my nephew's been living in this town now for almost a year, and I hadn't even had a chance to sit and visit with him one time, because every single time you interrupt us and you've got us running out to do stuff. So, all right, she marches off. Well, after a while, Philip says to me, you know, I've been wanting to talk to you about something anyway. He said, I'm glad you're here. He said, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. He said, can I play a video for you? He said, I want to show you a video, and I just want your feedback on this video. And I said, okay. Of course, I don't know what video it is, whether it's a movie or a TV show or what it is. He says to his wife, her name was Faye, he said, Faye, where's that video that we made? Oh, Philip, I don't know where that's at. I don't know where that is. Oh, I don't know. It could be anywhere. I don't know. He's, oh, come on, you know where it's at. You know, blah, blah. No, I don't know where it is. And he said, well, I want to play it for Chuck. Oh, he doesn't need it. You don't need to bother him with that. Oh, for Pete's sakes, you know. Now, this woman, you got to remember, my uncle's only a year and a half older than me. So this lady's about my age. You know, at the time, I was like around 30. Roughly, you know? And so, Philip is looking under the TV, he's looking through the cupboard there, you know, and he finally finds it. She comes in the living room. Oh, Philip, for crying out loud, you don't need to bother. And she was like, she was trying so hard for me not to see this video. And I said to him, I said, Philip, what in the world's on this video? Because I'm noticing his wife's acting awful weird. I said, what in the world is on that video anyway? He said, well, I didn't really want to tell you. He said, I want you to watch it, and I want you to listen, and I want you to tell me what you see in here without me saying anything. He said, if anybody is going to know what all this mess is, he said, I know you would. He said, and I told Faye ages ago, we need to show this to Chuck because he'll know what this is about. So finally he said, well, what we did was, he said, we've been having some weird stuff happening around this house. So we've had doors closing and slamming and noises and all this kind of stuff going on. And he said, and it was really starting to bother the girls because her daughters were teenagers. It was starting to scare them and stuff. And, you know, he said, so one day when we left the house for the day, we set a camcorder up on top of the refrigerator, and we just left it on, pointed down the hallway toward the front door, and he said, we just left it on, and when we came home, I want to show you what we videotaped. I said, okay, cool. Immediately I knew why she was working so hard to keep me from seeing it. I knew that those devil's days were numbered. I knew that, glory, I knew deliverance was about to come. I knew all hell's going to break loose and heaven follows. And I knew that the minute Philip told me that little bit about that movie, I knew what it was. So he puts it in the VCR and he's playing it. And every once in a while, you literally saw this white burst of light, almost like it started in the kitchen and it went down the hallway toward the front door. This white, you know, they call it an orb now, but it was bigger than an orb. It literally was like, I can't hardly describe it, but it was like almost like a mini sun, and you could see the rays, as it were, coming off of it, and it would kind of go down the hallway and dissipate. After a little while, here come one again. After a little while, here come one again. It kind of reminded me of the movie Poltergeist. Mm-hmm. And you remember the scene where they were videotaping this something coming down the stairs? Mm-hmm. And with the natural eye, it kind of looked like light things coming down the stairs. But when you looked at the video, they saw people, apparitions, you know. Well, it looked like those light things, sort of like you saw in the movie Poltergeist. And I thought, well, maybe that's cars going by, and maybe that's just like the sun glinting off of their bumper or something, or their, I was trying to, because again, I don't want people to think that I just run around and every little thing I see and every little thing I hear, I assume is of the devil. I don't. I do try to reason it out and look at it in terms of, could there be a natural explanation for this?
Right.
Well, part of the problem is Philip's front door had glass in it, kind of like these doors, had glass in it. But cars are driving by, here's the door facing this way, cars are driving by like this. It's not like they're coming at it from this angle so that the sun would be hitting the front bumper, the chrome or something, and then shining through the, no. They're driving by like this, so even if the sun kind of glinted off the car, it'd be kind of quick because it just passed, that quick. Well, the light wasn't passing that quick. It was taking its time, going down the hallway and dissipating, going down the hallway and dissipating. And so anyway, I said, okay, well, something's odd there. And after a while, I started to hear something, and I kind of leaned in. And Philip says, do you hear something? I said, yeah, I do. He said, see, I didn't want to say anything. I wanted to see if you heard it. He said, what do you hear? I said, well, turn it up a little bit. He turns it up. I said, my God, Philip, that sounds like you've got a congregation of people in your basement. It was faint. It was a little muttered like it was down in the basement. But it literally sounded like, hundreds of voices. You couldn't have fit that many people in their basement if you'd have wanted to. But I was hearing lots and lots and lots and lots of voices, and it sounded like they were conversing one with another, but it was very low on the video. And when he turned it up, you could hear a little bit better. Well, Philip finishes the film with me, and he said to me, can you help us with this? He said, I know you can. He said, and literally, my uncle knows me. He said, if anybody can, I know you can. He said, what do you think we should do with this? I said, I know what to do with it. I said, that's not a problem. I said, I've got my oil. I said, we need to do a purging. I said, I need to go through this house and I need to eject these things. And what do I call it? An expulsion. Do you know, for some reason my brain couldn't think of that word, an expulsion. I said, we need to expel these things from this property. So I go upstairs. I start right away. Go upstairs to the bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. I go through the bedrooms, the girls' bedrooms, my uncle's bedroom. I go in the bathroom, I do the bathroom, I did the hallway, I do all the closets, I do all the front and back of every door. What you're doing is you're basically, figuratively, you're inviting the presence of God into every corner and every crevice of that house. And you anoint every wall with olive oil. Olive oil represents the presence of the Lord. That's all it represents. So you anoint every wall with olive oil in the room. All 4 walls. And as I'm doing this, I'm inviting the presence of the Lord into this home. Lord, fill this place with your spirit. Fill this place with your presence. Let your power be known. Blah, 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 blah. Make yourself real to this family and to these people. I anoint the closets. I literally reach through the clothes and anoint the back of the closet. And I'll say, if there's anything unclean, if there's anything contrary to the knowledge of God in this home, it is not welcome here. It is not even welcome in this closet. Nothing that is contrary to God is welcome on the front of this door, and nothing that is contrary to God is welcome on the back of this door. So basically you're saying you're not welcome anywhere. You're not welcome on either side of the door. I go through the whole upstairs. I start to walk down the stairs, and I'm anointing the wall as I walk down the stairs with oil. All of a sudden, I hear the most ungodly, horrific scream you ever want to hear in your life come out of the kitchen. My aunt by marriage sounds like she's being driven through with a piece of jagged glass. Literally, screaming like The most high-pitched, horrific scream you've ever heard in your life. The biggest stupid grin come over my face. Because I knew. I said, thank you, Jesus. Here it comes. I told you, spirits are not attached to places. They are attached to people. My doing what I was doing, I'm driving them out of the location. Well, they can't leave the location without leaving her. Okay? They've been welcome throughout this whole home. All of a sudden, I'm making this home no longer welcome to them. Do you follow what I'm saying? And all of a sudden, they begin to manifest themselves in her body. And my uncle literally grabbed her and pulled her. And her feet went limp. She was not going to walk with him. She was not going to go with him. He pulls her to the bottom of the stairs. And he said, Chuck, and he had such a look of horror on his face, because I'm telling you, if you'd heard the scream we heard, he said, Chuck, I don't know what's happening. He said, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I said, Philip, don't worry about it. I do. And immediately I took that oil, I anointed her head, and I said, you unclean devil, in the name of Jesus, come out of this woman. And as I did that, she fell on the floor and she started writhing and foaming and just all kinds of stuff. I knew her daughter was due to be home from work. One of her daughters was due to be home from work. She worked at a local outlet mall. And I knew she was due to be home like within roughly an hour, because Philip had told me a little while earlier, she's supposed to be home in about an hour or so. And the first thing come into my mind was, Lord, don't let that girl get home until this woman is delivered. Because if she walks in and sees me casting demons out of her mother, she's not going to know what's going on. And then I'm going to have her running interference, and it's going to mess things up. So the first thing I said was, Lord, don't let that girl come home until this woman is delivered. Then the Spirit of the Lord began to show me the spirits. He showed me how they entered. And I called them out and I said, you spirit of pain, you've come into this life because of the abuse visited upon her by her father when she was young. I don't know anything about this woman's story. But God showed me. That's a word of knowledge. Okay? I'm speaking knowledge that I do not have in the flesh. But God, by the Holy Ghost, is allowing me to know not just what spirit has invaded her life, but how it came in. It came in because her father molested her for years as a young girl. Okay? And the pain that she was harboring and all, she wound up welcoming in certain spirits, So I'm calling these spirits out by name, glory to God. And we're going, and probably for about an hour or so. And no, it was more than that actually. But anyway, when we finally got done and I knew that Faye had been delivered, boy, I'll tell you what a change in the atmosphere. What a difference in the place. And Faye was saying, oh, CJ, oh my God, you don't know. She said, I feel like you saved my life. I feel like you rushed into a burning building to save my life. She said, I can't even explain how different I feel. And I began to minister to her and tell her, I said, Faye, your father molested you when you were young. And it hurt. And you had nobody to talk to. Nobody believed you. Anybody, you tried to tell your mother didn't want to believe you. I said, and you wound up, feeling, and she sat there and she says, I can't believe you know all this. I can't believe you know all that. And I explained to her, I said, well, that's one of the gifts of the Spirit, is the word of knowledge. And I said, when this is why the Bible said the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God. Honey, when you're fighting on God's team, He gives you every ounce of information you need to know what you're doing. If you're really doing it by the Holy Ghost, you got everything you need. I don't need anybody to tell me nothing, Jack. I don't want you to tell me nothing. Well, we're sitting there talking, she brought us coffee and everything. My Uncle Philip is a big guy. He's 6'4", 290 pounds, and that man was shaking like a leaf. My grandmother told me a couple days later or so, I talked to her on the phone in Connecticut, you know, and I said, so did Philip tell you what happened with Faye? She said, well, I guess you called it, didn't you? I said, I guess you were right. She said, when Philip called me and told me what happened, she said, his voice was shaking so bad. She said, I've never seen Philip like that. She said, that boy was scared out of his mind. They will scare the bejesus out of you folks. Don't kid yourself. You start dealing with demons because things that were happening were well beyond the realms of the natural. Okay? That woman was twisting and turning every which way, ways that the human body can't turn and twist. And things were coming out of her mouth, sounds and voices, and you know. So anyway, I say all that to say, spirits enter by reason of people. Okay? If Faye had lived in that home when she died, yes, the spirits that were in her life would have then been without a host. And yes, they may have very well hung around the property. One of the most prevalent tools that the enemy tries to use in bringing demonic activity into the next generation. Remember what I said before about when they come out of one, that they'll kind of look for the next weakest link. Okay? One of the techniques they use to try to gain access into the next generation is what we refer to as the ruse of inheritance. In other words, they want you to think, well, my mother used to suffer with depression. My mother was suicidal. Therefore, I can understand why I would suffer with depression, why I would be suicidal. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
You think it's legitimate in your life because, after all, it's hereditary. They want you to think that. They want you to think that, oh, this is just a hereditary. It's not hereditary. You've inherited the spirits that your mother left when she died. Do you follow what I'm saying? And if you're not responding to circumstances and situations from a biblical Christian perspective, if you're not responding to that situation with faith, then you may inadvertently open the door. Next thing you know, daughter is now suffering from a spirit of suicide. Now daughter is suffering from a spirit of depression. The very things that mom was under. I've seen episodes on these shows. I'm telling you, when I watch these television shows, I see them very differently than they do. I can see all the pieces, Jack. I can see it all there, but I'm seeing it differently than these so-called secular experts. There was an episode of, I believe it's a Haunting, that's the name of the show, where a young lady and her mother became possessed by demons, and literally they had to perform an exorcism on her. But her husband, the girl's father, had killed himself. He had shot himself with a gun. This girl kept having a dream, the daughter, and in her dream she saw a shadow figure that seemed to be encouraging her father to shoot himself. She said, in my dream, my father was not in that room alone. There was something there with him. And she said it was like it was trying to encourage him. It was pushing him. See? There was a suicidal spirit.
Yeah.
That man was not just psychologically depressed. No, there was a spiritual influence that was pushing him. And that spiritual influence was now tormenting the daughter because it troubled her deeply that something was trying to push my father to kill him. You know what I'm saying? She was seeing that there was something pushing him. It wasn't just, it'd be one thing if you just say, well, he was so depressed he shot himself. But when you have a dream repeating over and over and over again, showing you, no, it was almost like there was another person in the room, but it wasn't a person, it was like a so-called shadow figure. And it was pushing this man, and it was encouraging him. It's pushing the gun up to his mouth, all this. And she's seeing all this happening. And so it really caused her a lot of distress in her spirit, because she realized, wait a minute, something pushed my dad to do this. Well, all of a sudden now, dad's dead. And then he appears to her in the garden of the house they moved into. Not that they lived in. They moved to a new house. And she looks outside and she sees her dad standing there. And this girl said, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. And this girl wasn't even claiming to be a Christian per se. But she said, I just knew that was not my dad. Something was going on. You see, that spirit's wanting her to lower her guard. That spirit's We watched one show, one of these paranormal shows, where a gentleman had died. I forget how, whether he killed himself or what it was. Anyway, and one of the children was in her room one night. All of a sudden, an apparition appears to her, and it's her father. And he's kind of beckoning her to come to him. And she's kind of trepidatious about it. She's a little uncertain. Something doesn't quite strike her right. All of a sudden that thing changed form and showed its real self. Wasn't her father at all. But we got these foolish people out there telling people, oh, that's just the ghost of this person. That's just Listen, there are people who see these so-called ghosts and see them change form. See them appearing as their loved one, only to turn around and change into something demonic. You're talking to something you can't even see, and you think it is whatever it says it is, or whoever it says it is, okay? All right, so you need to understand, spirits come into a situation that is often referred to as a haunting. They come into homes, they come into properties, whether that be land, whatever the case might be, by reason of a person. There has to be an individual, somebody, or a group of people, whatever. There has to be some human connection to their entering that property. These so-called experts, though, this is an ancient spirit. It's been here for, tons and tons of millennium, and it's been here for hundreds of years. No, it is not. Somebody opened the door to that. Someone, some way, somehow opened the door to that. Another way oftentimes you'll find is, there's another one of these. I wish I could remember which show, but we've seen so many, I really can't remember which show exactly. But one of these shows, I remember a lady kept having a dream. She had a dream, and she told her pastor, priest, whatever it was, how that she had a dream. And she said, I saw these people performing a ritual, and they were in black robes and all this sort of thing, And again, that's how you invite spirits in. That's how the spirit got invited. But it came via people. A spirit does not come without there being some human connection. There has to be some human activity that is opening the door to that spirit to enter. If it's a spirit of witchcraft, if it's a spirit of occult, then that oftentimes is invited by reason of people playing with witchcraft, playing with the occult, playing with articles of divination, things of this nature, okay? So if you've got something going on in your home and you find out, well, the person who used to live here, they used to conduct seances, they used to play with Ouija boards. All right, now you know how that spirit got there. It's not an issue of so-and-so died and now they're going, no. Get that out of your head. That's not at all true. What you're dealing with is the spirits these people invited by reason of their activity. You follow what I'm saying? And when you understand that, then a lot of times it helps you to better deal with expelling them, because now you know what you're dealing with, even if you don't have discernment. And I told Jack this. I said, if you understand how, we talked about this during Paranormal 101. If you understand how these things work, Martin, you don't even need discernment. You literally can interview an individual, and if you know how spiritual warfare works, then you can put 2 and 2 together and say, aha, okay, I see the connection, connect the dots. We had a mother contact us about deliverance, and then I'm going to have to quit tonight. We'll have to, I guess this will go more than 2 weeks. We had a mother contact us when we were over there on Inwood Road. And I told her, I said, if you can bring your son, we'll be happy to try to work with you. She brought her son to the thrift shop, you remember? And we had the little coffee shop area in the back of the thrift shop. And we brought him back to the coffee shop area. He sat there the whole time, clammed up, tight-lipped, wouldn't say 2 words. Just sit there, clammed up. The mother, the grandmother, I told them, I said, now, when I'm doing what I'm doing, don't you dare try to jump in and get in the way. I said, because I'm going to tell you, the minute you do that, I'm going to stop and say, okay, take them on. Because I'm not playing. But if you want me to help you, you're going to, God only knows what's going to happen. You know, even I don't know how it's going to play out. Well, they're sitting, Mom and Grandma are sitting there, and they're trying to egg him on, because I'm trying to get him to talk a little bit. I'm trying to get him to, first of all, I want to know whether or not he's even interested in being delivered.
Right.
Mom and Grandma are interested, but I'm not sure he's interested.
And
He wasn't. He wasn't. And so, and I asked her, I said, because she said, oh, we've gone to other deliverance ministers and blah, blah, you know. And apparently he just went right back to the same garbage he did before. And I said, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I was telling him that, you know. And I'm trying to instruct. And as I'm talking to him, all of a sudden, I said, I can't remember the name exactly off the top of my head, but I said something to the effect of like, who's Richard? Like, was it, you remember that? I said, who's Richard? Or I can't remember the name, but it was something like that. Or Pat or somebody, you know? And the mother sat there and she said, oh, I don't know. I don't think he's ever known anybody by that name. Blah, 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 blah. Then after a little while, she said, oh, wait a minute. He used to have a soccer coach by that name. And he used to go over to his house a lot. He spent a lot of time with him. He had a son that was about his age. And remember? All of a sudden, boom. It all just opened up in front of me. I was seeing it. It was as clear as a bell. You don't even have to have discernment to see. Do you follow what I'm saying? When you understand how spiritual warfare works, then without even having discernment, you could that would just fall open to you, and you'd say, okay, wait a minute. How common is it that soccer coach dad who has a kid this age is inviting little boys his son's age over to the house to spend time with he and his kid, and then he's molesting the kid? That is how that kid's spiritual issues began. I saw it as clear as a bell. And I told the mother, I said, that's how it started right there. That kid would never open his mouth to confirm or deny one word I said, would he? He literally, Martin, just sat there the whole time, just wouldn't even look at me, just sat there, clammed up, wouldn't say a word. But see, God was causing the layers to be pulled back. If that kid had any desire in the world to be delivered, the Lord was peeling back the layers. And when the Holy Ghost does that sometimes, what it does is, in effect, it's like peeling off the scab. And it exposes the wound. And a lot of times that's a good thing, because then that pain that they may have been pushing down and suppressing for so many years, that pain and that torment in their spirit over this event and what was going on, all of a sudden it's kind of exposed. And if that boy would have allowed himself, as the Holy Ghost was peeling back that scab, if he'd have allowed himself to experience and feel the pain, if he'd allowed himself to feel that pain from all that which had transpired, and if he'd allowed himself to maybe start to cry or start, just whatever, that would have been the beginning of him being in a place to receive deliverance. But he was holding on to those demons as hard as he could. He was not going to let that pain go. He was not going to let that hurt go. He was not going to let that betrayal go. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And until he's ready to do that, he was not a candidate for deliverance.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, I videotaped that session. I had the videotape set up. And there were kitchen cabinets in the corner of the room. There was a sink in the corner and there were like kitchen cabinets there. When you look at that video, of course, everything Tommy sees, he has an explanation for, which drives me up the wall. But when you look at that video, it literally looked like the grain of the wood in the cabinet was moving. It looked like that kid was sitting and there was all this heat around him. Because you know how when heat rises, it kind of makes like things behind it look wavy and move, That is what I was seeing. When I looked at that video, I said, look at this. This looks like this kid is in the center of heat. And that there's heat going up. Because look at the way, well, maybe that's just the camera. Maybe that's just the way the camera's like. Now, I've used video cameras a million times. I've videotaped all kinds of stuff. Never one time have I seen a video camera create that effect when it was videotaping a wood brain. No, I'm telling you, that boy had so much demonic activity in his life that literally there was an invisible heat, so to speak, that was just rising off him, and even the camera detected that heat. And because I had a feeling we needed to videotape, I don't know what to do with the videotape, but there had to be a reason the Lord would have me to videotape that. There must have been something that was going to be caught. But anyhow, all right. So basically today we understand the most important principle of hauntings, so-called. All right? And that is all spiritual activity involving homes, places, properties, buildings, all that activity has to have had a start with somebody. Okay? It is not an issue of a dead person coming back. No, that's not what you're dealing with. What you're dealing with is the spirit that somebody invited there. And it could be a person who lived there and died there. It could be a spirit that person had invited into their life. And when they died, yes, that spirit now is without a home. And according to the Word of God, it is in effect roaming through the dry places, okay? But that means it's looking for its next host. And I've talked before about it, and I'll just say real fast again. Spirits find you. If you are a person who is spiritually vulnerable, and you're in a bad place spiritually, and you are easily able to be made a victim to demonic activity, those things find you, honey. And they will call you to these locations. They will draw you to these locations. How many times when you watch these programs do you see people say, oh, I went to look at this house, or I happened to see this house while I was walking down the street, and oh my God, I just had to live there. Oh, I just had this overwhelming feeling that that's where I had to live. And they go in with this incredible hyper-optimism only to have it all turn sour real fast. Okay? That Spirit found you. That draw you felt was literally the Spirit drawing you to that place, because it knew the history was there to justify its presence. It could use the history to justify its presence. And all we got to do is put the two together, put you together with that location, and boom, we've got a perfect storm. So they will draw people who are spiritually vulnerable to a location. So that's something else, I tell people, if you're feeling drawn that strongly to something, you might want to think about it. If you're not in a good place spiritually, you see, as Christians, I don't feel drawn to places. No, I feel the direction of the Lord. Now, if I go somewhere and I say, well, you know what? The Holy Ghost spoke to me and said, that's where I want you to be. You follow what I'm saying? That's entirely different than saying, this place was just calling for me. I just felt like this place was calling me. I just felt like this place was, do you see what I'm saying? It's a whole different transaction. It's a whole different situation. So next week we're going to continue. And as we continue with this, those that are watching by reason of the internet, I want you to understand, by the time we get done with this, you're going to know how to bring victory and deliverance into your own home. You have the ability in Jesus' name. All right.